The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Eldoria Palace as Lady Rosalind Blackthorne adjusted her ceremonial sash for the third time. Today marked the 20th anniversary of Queen Evangeline's coronation, and the entire kingdom had gathered to witness the grand celebration. Rosalind, the Queen's most trusted advisor and childhood friend, had spent months planning every detail of this momentous occasion. Queen Evangeline stood before her ornate mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had aged gracefully despite the heavy burden of ruling the kingdom of Eldoria. Her silver crown, adorned with sapphires that matched her eyes, caught the morning light as she practiced her ceremonial speech one final time. The Queen had ruled with wisdom and compassion for 2 decades, earning the love and respect of her people. However, not everyone in the palace shared this sentiment. Duchess Victoria Ashford, the Queen's sister-in-law, paced nervously in her private chambers. Victoria had always believed she deserved the throne more than Evangeline. Born into nobility while Evangeline had married into it, Victoria felt the crown should have been hers by birthright. Over the years, her resentment had grown into something far darker and more dangerous. The ceremonial hall filled with hundreds of guests, including foreign dignitaries, nobles from across the realm, and representatives from every corner of Eldoria. The royal guard, led by Captain Marcus Thornfield, took their positions throughout the hall. Captain Thornfield was known throughout the kingdom for his unwavering loyalty and keen sense of duty. He had served the crown for 15 years and had never once faltered in his responsibilities. As the ceremony began, Queen Evangeline made her entrance to thunderous applause. She moved gracefully down the aisle, acknowledging her subjects with warm smiles and gentle nods. The Archbishop of Eldoria waited at the altar, ready to perform the blessing ritual that would renew the Queen's sacred vows to her kingdom. Lady Rosalind watched from the side, her heart swelling with pride for her dear friend. She noticed Duchess Victoria standing with the other royal family members, but something in Victoria's posture seemed off. There was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that Rosalind had never seen before. The ceremony proceeded beautifully for the first hour. The Queen delivered her speech about unity, prosperity, and hope for the future. The crowd responded with enthusiastic cheers, and even the usually stoic foreign ambassadors seemed moved by her words. Traditional dancers performed ancient rituals, and the royal choir sang hymns that echoed through the vaulted ceilings. But, as the ceremony reached its climax, when Queen Evangeline was to receive the renewed blessing of the sacred oils, something unexpected happened. Duchess Victoria suddenly stepped forward from her place among the royal family. Her face was flushed, and her hands were trembling with barely contained emotion. "Stop this charade!" Victoria's voice rang out across the silent hall. Every head turned toward her in shock and confusion. "This woman has no right to wear that crown." Queen Evangeline paused, the blessed oil still glistening on her forehead. Her expression remained calm, though those who knew her well could see the hurt and surprise in her eyes. "Victoria, what are you doing?" she asked softly, her voice carrying despite its gentle tone. "What I should have done 20 years ago," Victoria replied, her voice growing stronger and more defiant. "You stole my birthright, Evangeline. You married my brother and convinced him to pass over his own blood in favor of his wife. But I am the true heir to this throne." Captain Thornfield moved closer, his hand instinctively moving to his sword. He had dealt with disruptions before, but never from a member of the royal family. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for any signs of additional trouble or potential threats. The crowd began to murmur, their confusion evident. Many had never heard this version of the succession story. In truth, the law had been clear when Evangeline's husband, the former King Edmund, had died suddenly in a hunting accident. As his widow and the mother of the future heir, Evangeline had rightfully assumed the regency until their son came of age. However, their son had died in infancy, leaving Evangeline as the legitimate ruler. Lady Rosalind stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Victoria, please. This is not the time or place for such discussions. Perhaps we could speak privately after the ceremony?" But Victoria was beyond reason now. Years of suppressed anger and jealousy had finally found their outlet. No more private discussions. No more hidden truths. The people deserve to know that their beloved queen is nothing more than a usurper. The foreign dignitaries looked on in fascination and horror. This was exactly the kind of royal drama that would dominate headlines across the continent for weeks to come. The ambassador from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria leaned forward in his seat, no doubt already composing the urgent dispatch he would send to his king. Queen Evangeline maintained her composure, though her heart was breaking. Victoria had been like a sister to her once. They had laughed together, shared secrets, and supported each other through the difficulties of court life. To see her now, consumed by hatred and bitterness, was almost unbearable. The succession was legal and proper, Queen Evangeline said firmly but without anger. The council of nobles, the church, and the people all accepted my rule. I have served this kingdom faithfully for 20 years. Built on lies. Victoria shouted, and suddenly, shockingly, she lunged forward toward the queen. Her hands were outstretched, her face contorted with rage. It was clear she intended to physically attack the sovereign. Captain Thornfield reacted with lightning speed. He intercepted Victoria before she could reach the queen, catching her arms and restraining her firmly but without unnecessary force. Duchess Victoria Ashford, he announced in his commanding voice, you are under arrest for treason and assault upon the crown. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles gasped and whispered frantically among themselves. The royal guards moved to secure all exits, following established protocols for threats to the monarch. The foreign dignitaries sat transfixed, witnessing history unfold before their eyes. Victoria struggled against Captain Thornfield's grip, her composure completely shattered. You cannot arrest me. I am royal blood. I am the rightful queen. Royal blood does not place you above the law, Captain Thornfield replied calmly. Especially not when that law protects the crown itself. As Victoria was escorted from the hall, still shouting her accusations and claims, Queen Evangeline stood motionless at the altar. The blessed oil had dried on her forehead, but the ceremony felt incomplete, tainted by the violence and hatred that had interrupted it. Lady Rosalind approached her friend and queen. Your Majesty, shall we postpone the remainder of the ceremony? Queen Evangeline considered for a moment, then shook her head. No. The people came here to witness the renewal of my vows to this kingdom. Victoria's bitterness will not prevent me from fulfilling that promise. And so, with remarkable grace under pressure, Queen Evangeline completed the ceremony. The Archbishop, though shaken, finished the blessing ritual. The crowd, initially subdued by the shocking incident, gradually returned their attention to their beloved monarch. But everyone in attendance knew that this day would be remembered not just for the celebration of Queen Evangeline's 20-year reign, but for the moment when the royal family's hidden fractures were exposed for all the world to see. 2nd Chronicle. The dungeon cells beneath Eldoria Palace had not housed a prisoner of noble blood in over a century. The stone walls, damp with centuries of accumulated moisture, seemed to echo with the weight of history as Duchess Victoria Ashford found herself behind iron bars for the first time in her privileged life. Captain Marcus Thornfield descended the narrow stone steps, his boots echoing in the confined space. As head of the royal guard, he had never imagined he would need to personally oversee the imprisonment of a member of the royal family. The heavy keys jangled at his belt as he approached Victoria's cell, where she sat on the simple wooden bench, her elaborate ceremonial gown now wrinkled and stained. I demand to see my lawyer, Victoria said without looking up as Thornfield approached. Her voice had lost its earlier fury and now carried a tone of weary defiance. I demand to see the Queen. I demand to be released immediately. You'll have access to legal counsel, Your Grace, Thornfield replied formally. However, given the nature of your crimes and your clear threat to the crown's safety, certain protocols must be followed. Victoria finally raised her head, and Thornfield could see that she had been crying. Her makeup was smeared, and her usually perfect hair hung in disheveled strands around her face. Despite everything that had happened, he felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had known Victoria for years and had always found her to be demanding but not malicious. What crimes? She asked bitterly. Speaking the truth? Claiming what is rightfully mine. Treason, Your Grace. Physical assault upon the sovereign. Disruption of a state ceremony. These are serious charges that carry serious consequences. Above in the palace, Queen Evangeline sat in her private study with Lady Rosalind and Lord Chancellor William Fairfax. The Lord Chancellor, a thin, scholarly man in his 60s, had served the crown faithfully through 3 monarchs. He was known for his strict adherence to law and protocol, but also for his wisdom in navigating complex political situations. "The law is clear, Your Majesty," Lord Chancellor Fairfax was saying, his fingers drumming nervously on the mahogany desk. "Treason against the crown is punishable by death. However, given the Duchess's royal status and the complicated family dynamics involved, we have several options available to us." Queen Evangeline stared out the tall window overlooking the palace gardens. The same gardens where she and Victoria had once walked together, discussing their hopes and dreams as young women new to court life. "I never wanted this, William. Victoria was like a sister to me once." "Your Majesty," Lady Rosalind interjected gently, "we must consider the implications of whatever decision you make." The foreign ambassadors witnessed everything. Word of this incident will spread throughout the kingdom and beyond. How you handle Victoria's fate will be seen as a measure of your strength as a ruler. Lord Chancellor Fairfax nodded gravely. Lady Rosalind speaks wisely. Show too much mercy, and you risk appearing weak. Show too little, and you risk appearing tyrannical. The people expect justice, but they also remember that Victoria is family. Meanwhile, news of the incident was already spreading throughout the kingdom like wildfire. In the taverns of the capital city, citizens gathered to discuss the shocking events they had heard about from servants and guards who had witnessed the ceremony. The story grew more dramatic with each telling. "I heard she tried to stab the Queen with a ceremonial dagger," whispered Margaret the baker to her customers. "No, corrected Thomas the blacksmith, "she tried to tear the crown right off Her Majesty's head during the blessing." In the noble houses throughout Eldoria, emergency meetings were being called. Many of the aristocratic families had complex relationships with both Queen Evangeline and Duchess Victoria. Some had privately supported Victoria's claims over the years, while others had prospered under Queen Evangeline's rule. Duke Aldrich of Westmore called together his closest advisors in his estate's war room. "This changes everything," he said grimly. "If Victoria had supporters planning to back her claim, they'll either have to act now or abandon her completely." "Do we know if this was a planned revolt or simply an emotional outburst?" asked his military advisor, General Harrison. "That's what we need to determine," Duke Aldrich replied. "Because if Victoria had co-conspirators, they're either planning something desperate right now, or they're burning any evidence that connects them to her." Back in the palace, Captain Thornfield received an urgent message from his network of informants throughout the kingdom. Several noble houses had been observed sending urgent dispatches to unknown destinations. Armed men had been seen moving under cover of darkness near the borders of 3 different duchies. Thornfield immediately sought an audience with Queen Evangeline. He found her in the throne room, where she was receiving reports from various ministers about the day's events and their aftermath. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "I have concerning intelligence that suggests Duchess Victoria may not have been acting alone." The Queen's expression grew grave. "Explain." "Multiple noble houses are showing signs of unusual activity. Messages being sent, men being mobilized. It's possible that Victoria's outburst was either a signal to co-conspirators, or it has prompted them to accelerate whatever plans they may have had." Lady Rosalind paled. "You're suggesting there might be a broader conspiracy against the crown?" "I'm suggesting we cannot rule it out, my lady. Victoria's claims about birthright and legitimacy may have resonated with other nobles who have their own ambitions or grievances." Queen Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did in this moment. "What do you recommend, Captain?" "Increased security throughout the palace and the capital. Discreetly monitor the noble houses showing suspicious activity. And, perhaps, question Duchess Victoria more thoroughly about whether she had any allies in her plans." Down in the dungeons, Victoria had been moved to a larger cell with slightly better accommodations, befitting her noble status despite her crimes. She had been provided with clean clothes and decent food, though nothing approaching the luxury she was accustomed to. When Captain Thornfield arrived for questioning, accompanied by Lord Chancellor Fairfax, Victoria was sitting at the small table reading from a prayer book that had been provided by the palace chaplain. Duchess Victoria, Lord Chancellor Fairfax began formally, "We need to discuss the full extent of your activities leading up to today's incident." Victoria looked up from her prayer book, and her eyes held a different quality now. Gone was the wild anger from the ceremony, replaced by a cold calculation. "I have nothing to say beyond what I've already said. I spoke the truth about my rightful claim to the throne. We have reason to believe you may have had assistance in planning today's disruption," Captain Thornfield said directly. "It would be in your best interest to cooperate with this investigation." A slight smile played at the corners of Victoria's mouth. "Do you really think I would be foolish enough to plan something so public, so dramatic, if I had co-conspirators? If I had real support, Captain, don't you think I would have chosen a more effective approach?" The implication was chilling. Victoria was essentially admitting that her outburst had been spontaneous, driven by emotion rather than calculation. Which meant that any other plots or conspiracies were separate from her actions and might be far more dangerous. However, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a thoughtful tone, "I would not be surprised if my brave stand today has inspired others to examine their own loyalties. After all, I merely said aloud what many have whispered in private for years." Lord Chancellor Fairfax exchanged a concerned glance with Captain Thornfield. Victoria's words suggested that even if she hadn't been part of a larger conspiracy, her actions might have triggered something much more serious than a single act of treason. As the second day after the incident drew to a close, reports continued to flow in from across the kingdom. 3 minor nobles had left their estates suddenly, claiming urgent business in neighboring kingdoms. A cache of weapons had been discovered hidden in a barn outside the capital, though no direct connection to any particular house had been established. Most concerning of all, the royal courier system reported that several messages addressed to foreign courts had been intercepted, though their contents remained encrypted and unreadable. Queen Evangeline realized that what had begun as a family dispute had potentially evolved into a threat to the stability of her entire kingdom. The question was no longer just what to do with Victoria, but how to protect the crown from whatever larger forces her outburst might have set in motion. 3rd Chronicle. The War Council chamber in Eldoria Palace had not been used for its intended purpose in 15 years of peace. Now, as dawn broke on the 3rd day following the ceremony incident, Queen Evangeline found herself surrounded by maps, intelligence reports, and the grim faces of her most trusted advisors. General Edmund Blackwood, the kingdom's military commander, spread a large map of Eldoria across the oak table. Red markers indicated locations where suspicious activities had been reported. "Your Majesty, the pattern is becoming clear. We're not dealing with random unrest, but coordinated movement." Captain Thornfield pointed to several locations on the map. "Here, here, and here. 3 separate noble houses have emptied their private armories and moved significant numbers of armed men to strategic positions near major roads and supply routes." "Are we looking at open rebellion?" Queen Evangeline asked, though she dreaded the answer. Lord Chancellor Fairfax consulted his notes. "Not yet, Your Majesty. But we're certainly looking at preparation for one. The question is whether Victoria's outburst was the spark that lit a fire that was already laid, or whether it simply provided an excuse for something that was already being planned." Lady Rosalind had spent the night coordinating with the kingdom's network of spies and informants. She looked exhausted but determined. "I've received word from our agents in the noble houses. Duke Aldrich of Westmore has been hosting secret meetings for months. Count Roderick of Thornhill has been stockpiling grain and supplies as if preparing for a siege. Most troubling, Duchess Cordelia of Ravenshollow has been in regular correspondence with Prince Victor of Astoria." The mention of Prince Victor sent a chill through the room. The neighboring kingdom of Astoria had been peaceful with Eldoria for decades, but Prince Victor was known to harbor ambitions of expanding his territory. If he was communicating with discontented Eldorian nobles, it suggested the possibility of foreign intervention in any potential rebellion. "We need to question Victoria again," Queen Evangeline decided. "If she knows anything about these broader conspiracies, we need that information now." In her cell, Duchess Victoria was no longer the broken, weeping woman she had been the day before. She had spent hours in meditation and prayer, and seemed to have found some inner resolve. When Captain Thornfield and Lady Rosalind arrived to question her, she greeted them with an almost serene smile. "Good morning, Captain." "Lady Rosalind. I trust you've been discovering just how many people in this kingdom share my concerns about our dear Queen's legitimacy. What do you know about the activities of Duke Aldrich and the others?" Lady Rosalind asked directly. Victoria's smile widened slightly. "I know that truth has a way of spreading, even when those in power try to suppress it. I know that many nobles have grown tired of being ruled by someone who gained her throne through marriage rather than birthright. Are you aware of any specific plans for rebellion or violence?" Captain Thornfield pressed. "I am aware that change is coming to Eldoria, whether Evangeline likes it or not," Victoria replied cryptically. "My outburst at the ceremony was simply the first domino to fall." Meanwhile, in the Duchy of Westmore, Duke Aldrich was indeed hosting another secret meeting. The participants included Count Roderick, Duchess Cordelia, and 3 other minor nobles who had grievances against Queen Evangeline's rule. But they also included a figure whose presence would have shocked the royal court, Sir Marcus Draven, the former royal treasurer who had been dismissed 5 years earlier for financial irregularities. "Victoria has provided us with the perfect opportunity," Sir Marcus was saying, his voice filled with bitter satisfaction. "The Queen is distracted, the people are confused, and the international community is watching to see how she handles this crisis." Duke Aldrich, a man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes, studied the military maps spread before them. "The plan remains the same as we've discussed. We control the major roads, cut off communication between the capital and the loyal provinces, and present the Queen with a fait accompli." "And if she refuses to abdicate?" asked Count Roderick nervously. "Then, we will have Prince Victor's support to ensure the transition of power," Duchess Cordelia replied coolly. "He has guaranteed military assistance if needed." What the conspirators didn't know was that one of their number, Baron Frederick of Millhaven, had been secretly reporting their activities to Queen Evangeline's spies. Frederick had initially joined the conspiracy out of financial desperation, but, as the plots grew more serious, his conscience had gotten the better of him. Through Baron Frederick, Captain Thornfield knew the exact details of the rebels' plans. The uprising was scheduled to begin in 2 days, during the Festival of Harvest, when many of the royal guards would be dispersed throughout the kingdom maintaining order at local celebrations. "We have 2 options," General Blackwood explained to the War Council. "We can arrest the conspirators now, before they can act. Or we can allow them to begin their rebellion and crush it decisively, which would eliminate any future threats but would risk more bloodshed." Queen Evangeline faced the most difficult decision of her reign. Acting too quickly might mean arresting nobles based on limited evidence, potentially creating martyrs and destabilizing the kingdom. Waiting too long might mean allowing a civil war to begin. "There's a third option," Lady Rosalind suggested quietly. "We could use Baron Frederick to feed the conspirators false information, convince them that their plot has been discovered and that they should flee the kingdom rather than fight." "That's risky," Captain Thornfield observed. "If they realize Frederick has been compromised, they might accelerate their timeline or become even more desperate and dangerous." As the council debated strategies, a new piece of intelligence arrived that changed everything. A messenger burst into the chamber with urgent news. Prince Victor of Astoria had crossed the border with a small military force, claiming to be coming to mediate the crisis in Eldoria. "That's an act of war," General Blackwood said grimly. "Foreign troops on our soil without invitation." Queen Evangeline stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. She could see her people going about their daily lives, unaware that their kingdom teetered on the brink of civil war and foreign invasion. "Send word to all loyal houses," she commanded, her voice filled with new determination. "Call up the militia. Send messages to our allies in the neighboring kingdoms. And prepare the royal guard for battle." "And Victoria?" Captain Thornfield asked. The Queen was quiet for a moment. "Victoria stays in custody. If she truly believes she has a rightful claim to the throne, she can make her case before a proper court when this crisis is resolved. But I will not let her become a rallying point for rebellion while foreign armies threaten our soil." Back in the dungeons, Victoria somehow seemed to sense the changing tide above. When her evening meal was brought by the guards, she could hear the increased activity in the palace, the sound of armor, the marching of feet, the urgent voices of messengers. "It's beginning, isn't it?" she asked the guard who brought her food. The guard, a young man named Thomas who had served in the palace for only 2 years, looked uncomfortable. "I'm not supposed to discuss palace business with prisoners, Your Grace." Victoria studied his face and smiled sadly. "You're a good soldier, Thomas. When the fighting starts, remember that some of us are fighting for what we believe is right, even if we've chosen the wrong methods." As night fell over Eldoria, both sides prepared for what might be the kingdom's greatest crisis in generations. Queen Evangeline met with foreign ambassadors, trying to maintain diplomatic relations while preparing for the possibility of war. The rebels finalized their plans, unaware that their secrets had been compromised. And, somewhere between the palace and the rebel strongholds, Prince Victor's forces moved closer to the capital, bringing with them the threat of international conflict. The kingdom that had celebrated its queen's 20-year reign just 3 days earlier now faced the possibility of civil war, foreign invasion, and the potential end of the peaceful era that Queen Evangeline had worked so hard to maintain. In her cell, Victoria knelt in prayer, asking for forgiveness for her role in bringing such chaos to the kingdom she claimed to love. Above her, Queen Evangeline stood in her private chapel, praying for the wisdom to guide her people through the darkness that lay ahead. 4th Chronicle. The pre-dawn hours of the 4th day brought an eerie silence to Eldoria Palace. Queen Evangeline stood in her armor for the first time in 20 years, the metal plates feeling foreign and heavy against her body. She had hoped never to wear battle dress again, but the reports from her scouts left no doubt. Prince Victor's forces were now only hours away from the capital, and the rebel lords had begun their coordinated uprising across the kingdom. Captain Thornfield entered the Queen's armory chamber, fully equipped for war. His usually pristine uniform had been replaced by practical battle gear, and his ceremonial sword exchanged for a weapon designed for combat rather than ceremony. "Your Majesty, the last of the loyal houses have confirmed their forces are mobilizing. Duke Harrison of Northbrook is marching south with 800 men. The Earl of Golden Vale has secured the eastern approaches to the capital." "But..." He hesitated. "Speak freely, Marcus. This is no time for diplomatic language. We're outnumbered, Your Majesty. The rebels have at least 1,500 men, plus whatever forces Prince Victor has brought. Our intelligence suggests he's crossed the border with at least 1,000 Asturian soldiers." Queen Evangeline finished buckling her sword belt, the familiar weight bringing back memories of her youth when her father had insisted she learn combat skills alongside statecraft. "Numbers aren't everything, Marcus. We have the advantage of fighting for our homeland, and we know this terrain better than any foreign prince." In the rebel camp, Duke Aldrich was having similar discussions with his war council, though his tone was far more confident. They had established their headquarters in the abandoned ruins of Greyrock Castle, 15 miles from the capital. The ancient fortress provided excellent defensive positions and had symbolic value as the seat of Eldoria's original kings before the capital was moved centuries ago. "Prince Victor's forces will arrive by midday," Sir Marcus Draven reported, consulting a message that had arrived by Raven an hour earlier. "He suggests we coordinate our attack on the capital for tomorrow dawn, when the defenders will be tired from a night of preparation." Count Roderick looked nervous as he studied the battle plans. "Are we certain the people will support us once the fighting begins?" Victoria's outburst was shocking, but will that translate to popular support for overthrowing Queen Evangeline? "The people want strong leadership," Duchess Cordelia replied confidently. 20 years of Evangeline's soft rule has made Eldoria weak. When they see Prince Victor's strength combined with our righteousness, they'll understand that change was necessary." What Duchess Cordelia didn't know was that Baron Frederick had managed to send one final piece of intelligence to Captain Thornfield before the rebels became too suspicious of his loyalties. The message revealed the exact timing and approach routes for the coordinated attack, giving Queen Evangeline's forces a crucial advantage. In her cell, Victoria heard the sounds of preparation echoing through the palace above. Guards rushed past her door with increased frequency, and she could smell smoke from the forges where weapons were being sharpened and armor repaired. A part of her felt responsible for the bloodshed that was about to begin, But another part felt vindicated that her claims had resonated so strongly with the nobility. When Captain Thornfield came to see her one final time before the battle, Victoria looked up from her prayers with an expression that mixed regret and defiance. "Marcus, you've always been an honorable man. Even now, when you could treat me harshly for what I've caused, you've shown me respect. You're still a member of the royal family, Your Grace, regardless of your actions." Victoria stood and approached the bars of her cell. "If the worst happens today, if Evangeline's forces are defeated and the rebels take the capital, what will become of me?" Captain Thornfield considered the question carefully. "That would depend on many factors, Your Grace. But I suspect your fate would be tied to whatever arrangement is made with Prince Victor and his Asturian forces." "And if Evangeline wins?" "Then, you'll face trial for treason, as planned. Though I suspect Her Majesty's mercy might be influenced by whether your supporters are willing to lay down their arms and accept her rule." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus, I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, I never intended for foreign armies to set foot on Eldorian soil. That was never part of what I wanted. I believe you, Your Grace. But intentions and consequences are often very different things." As the morning progressed, both armies moved into position. Queen Evangeline had decided on a defensive strategy, using the capital's walls and the loyalty of its citizens to her advantage. The palace guards were supplemented by militia from the city's guilds and volunteers from among the common people who had prospered under her rule. Prince Victor's arrival at the rebel camp created an immediate shift in the dynamics of the situation. The Asturian prince was a tall, imposing man in his early 30s, with dark hair and calculating eyes. He surveyed the rebel forces with the expression of someone evaluating a business transaction rather than joining a righteous cause. "Duke Aldrich," he said in accented Eldorian, "your message spoke of popular support for this rebellion. Yet I see no crowds of citizens joining your cause." Duke Aldrich felt a moment of uncertainty. "The people are cautious, Your Highness. They need to see that we can succeed before they openly declare their support." Prince Victor's smile was cold. "In my experience, people follow strength. If your cause requires victory to gain support, then you must ensure victory quickly and decisively." What the rebels didn't realize was that Prince Victor's true interest lay not in supporting Victoria's claim or reforming Eldorian government, but in weakening the kingdom enough to make it ripe for eventual Asturian annexation. His forces were there not to install a new ruler, but to create enough chaos that Astoria could later claim to be restoring order while actually absorbing Eldorian territory. Lady Rosalind had spent the morning coordinating with loyal agents throughout the kingdom, and the intelligence she gathered painted a complex picture. While the rebel lords had significant military force, popular support for their cause was limited. Most citizens remained loyal to Queen Evangeline, though they were confused and frightened by the sudden outbreak of violence. "The key will be ending this quickly," she reported to Queen Evangeline as the final preparations were made. "The longer the fighting continues, the more likely it becomes that other foreign powers will decide to intervene as well." As noon approached, scouts reported that the combined rebel and Asturian forces were moving toward the capital. The battle would begin within hours, and the fate of the kingdom would be decided before sunset. Queen Evangeline gathered her commanders for a final briefing. "Remember, we're not just fighting for my crown. We're fighting for Eldoria's independence, for the right of our people to choose their own destiny without foreign interference." General Blackwood nodded grimly. "The men understand, Your Majesty. They've seen what happens to kingdoms that fall under Asturian influence. They'll fight with everything they have." In the palace chapel, the royal chaplain held a service for all who wished to attend before the battle. Soldiers, servants, and nobles knelt together, praying for protection and for the strength to defend their homeland. As the afternoon sun began to decline, the first sounds of approaching armies could be heard in the distance. The great test of Queen Evangeline's reign was about to begin, and with it would come the answer to questions that had plagued Eldoria since Victoria's fateful outburst at the anniversary ceremony. Deep in her cell, Victoria could hear the approaching thunder of hooves and marching feet. She closed her eyes and prayed that whatever happened in the coming hours, her beloved kingdom would survive the chaos she had helped to unleash. 5th Chronicle. The Battle of Eldoria's Gate began at sunset, when the combined forces of the rebels and Prince Victor's Asturian army crested the hills overlooking the capital. The sight that greeted them was not what they had expected. Instead of a frightened city cowering behind its walls, they saw banners flying proudly from every tower, citizens manning the battlements alongside professional soldiers, and Queen Evangeline herself visible on the central gatehouse, her silver armor gleaming in the fading light. Prince Victor frowned as he studied the scene through his spyglass. "Your intelligence about popular support for the rebellion appears to have been optimistic," he said to Duke Aldrich. The Duke shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Over the past few hours, as they had approached the capital, they had encountered none of the welcoming crowds or supportive nobles they had hoped for. Instead, several minor lords who had initially seemed sympathetic to their cause had sent messages declaring their renewed loyalty to Queen Evangeline. "The people have been deceived by her propaganda," Sir Marcus Draven insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Once they see our strength, they'll realize which side serves their true interests." But, even as he spoke, they could hear something that chilled the rebels' hearts, the sound of singing coming from within the city walls. The citizens were singing the ancient anthem of Eldoria, their voices carrying across the evening air in a display of unity that spoke louder than any military preparation. Captain Thornfield stood beside Queen Evangeline on the gatehouse, watching the enemy forces arrange themselves for battle. "Your Majesty, their numbers are as we expected. But I noticed something interesting. There seems to be tension between the Asturian forces and the rebel lords." Queen Evangeline had noticed it too. Through her own spyglass, she could see heated discussions taking place in the enemy camp, with Prince Victor and Duke Aldrich appearing to disagree about something. "Marcus, I want you to do something that might seem unusual," the Queen said. "Send a herald to the enemy camp. Offer safe passage to any Eldorian-born soldiers who wish to lay down their arms and return to their homes." Captain Thornfield looked surprised. "Your Majesty, that's remarkably merciful given the circumstances. Those are my people down there, Marcus. Even the ones who've been misled. I'd rather save their lives than prove a point with their deaths." The herald, carrying a white banner, rode out to the enemy camp as darkness fell. When he returned an hour later, his report was encouraging. More than 200 of the rebel soldiers had accepted the Queen's offer and quietly slipped away into the night, much to Prince Victor's fury. "She's dividing our forces," the prince raged at Duke Aldrich. "This is why I warned against relying on local support. Eldorian soldiers have emotional ties to their homeland that make them unreliable allies." Duke Aldrich was beginning to realize that his alliance with Prince Victor might have been a catastrophic mistake. The Asturian prince showed no respect for Eldorian customs or concerns, and seemed more interested in conquest than in supporting Victoria's legitimate claims. In her cell, Victoria was experiencing her own crisis of conscience. The sounds of battle preparation echoing through the palace made the reality of the situation undeniable. Foreign soldiers were about to attack her homeland, and she was the catalyst for this invasion. When a guard brought her evening meal, she made an unexpected request. "I need to speak with Captain Thornfield immediately. Tell him it's urgent and relates to the battle." Within minutes, Captain Thornfield appeared at her cell, still wearing his battle armor. "What is it, Your Grace?" Victoria gripped the iron bars of her cell, her knuckles white with tension. "Marcus, I need you to know that I never intended for foreign armies to invade Eldoria. Whatever my grievances with Evangeline, I never wanted Asturian soldiers on our soil." "What are you telling me, Your Grace?" "I'm telling you that if there's anything I can do to help end this without further bloodshed, I'm willing to do it. Even if it means renouncing my claims publicly." Captain Thornfield studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. What he saw was genuine anguish and regret. "That's a significant offer, Your Grace. Let me speak with Her Majesty." The battle began in earnest just after midnight. Prince Victor had decided on a night attack, hoping to catch the defenders off guard. His Asturian forces, experienced in siege warfare, approached the walls under cover of darkness while the remaining rebel forces created diversions at other points around the city. But Queen Evangeline's forces were ready. The loyal citizens had spent days preparing defensive positions, and their knowledge of every street and building in their city gave them significant advantages. As the Asturian soldiers attempted to scale the walls, they found themselves facing not just professional guards, but bakers and blacksmiths, merchants and farmers, all fighting to protect their homes. The turning point came when Baron Frederick, who had been secretly reporting to the royal forces, managed to sabotage several of the rebels' siege engines just as they were being brought into position. The explosions not only eliminated crucial equipment but also created confusion in the enemy ranks about whether they had been infiltrated. General Blackwood, commanding the defense from the eastern wall, sent a message to Queen Evangeline, "Your Majesty, the enemy forces are beginning to fragment. The Asturians are pushing forward regardless of casualties, but many of the remaining rebel forces are pulling back." Queen Evangeline made a decision that would be remembered in Eldorian history books for generations. She ordered the main gates to be opened, and personally led a cavalry charge against the enemy lines. Her appearance on the battlefield, silver armor gleaming in the torchlight, had an electric effect on both sides. For her own forces, seeing their queen risk her life alongside them inspired a fierce determination. For the enemy, the sight of Queen Evangeline charging directly toward them, sword raised and battle cry echoing across the field, was a shocking reminder that they were fighting not just soldiers, but the embodiment of Eldorian independence. The charge broke the back of the rebel resistance. Faced with their queen's personal courage and the obvious loyalty of her people, many of the remaining rebel soldiers threw down their weapons and surrendered. Duke Aldrich, seeing his cause collapsing around him, made a desperate attempt to reach Queen Evangeline in single combat, perhaps hoping to end the battle with her death. But Captain Thornfield intercepted him, and their sword fight in the midst of the larger battle became the stuff of legend. Both men were skilled warriors, but Thornfield fought with the strength of absolute loyalty while Aldrich fought with the desperation of a failing cause. Prince Victor, seeing that the battle was lost, made a characteristic decision. He abandoned his Eldorian allies and ordered his forces to retreat across the border. But Queen Evangeline had anticipated this possibility and had sent fast cavalry units to cut off his retreat routes. By dawn, Prince Victor found himself surrounded and facing the choice between surrender and a hopeless last stand. His surrender, when it came, was grudging and filled with threats about Asturian retaliation. "This isn't over," he warned Queen Evangeline when he was brought before her. "Astoria will not forget this humiliation." "Astoria will remember that Eldoria defends itself," Queen Evangeline replied calmly. "And perhaps your king will choose his future interventions more carefully." In the aftermath of the battle, the true cost of Victoria's outburst became clear. Nearly 300 people had died, including many who had simply been caught up in events beyond their control. The kingdom's treasury would need months to recover from the cost of mobilizing for war. Several noble houses had been shattered by the revelation of their treasonous activities. But there was also cause for celebration. The attempted rebellion had ultimately strengthened Queen Evangeline's rule by proving both her courage in battle and the loyalty of her people. Foreign powers that might have seen Eldoria as weak or divided now understood that the kingdom would fight fiercely to maintain its independence. Victoria was brought from her cell to witness the surrender ceremonies. When she saw the cost of the chaos her actions had triggered, she wept openly. In front of the assembled nobles and foreign diplomats, she formally renounced any claim to the throne and begged Queen Evangeline's forgiveness. "I acted from wounded pride and jealousy," she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I allowed my personal grievances to blind me to the good of the kingdom. I ask not for mercy for myself, but for understanding for those who were misled by my bitterness." Queen Evangeline's response surprised everyone present. Instead of pronouncing harsh judgment, she stepped forward and embraced Victoria, her sister-in-law and former friend. "The crown is heavy enough without carrying the weight of family hatred," Queen Evangeline said. "Victoria, you will face justice for your actions, but you will face it as my family, not as my enemy." Victoria was sentenced to house arrest in a remote monastery, where she would spend the rest of her life in prayer and contemplation. It was a merciful sentence that acknowledged both her crimes and her royal blood. Duke Aldrich and the other rebel lords faced harsher punishments, including loss of titles and lengthy imprisonment. Sir Marcus Draven, as the architect of much of the conspiracy, was sentenced to exile. Prince Victor and his surviving forces were escorted to the border and released, but not before signing a treaty that included significant reparations to Eldoria and guarantees against future interference. In the months that followed, Queen Evangeline's reign entered what historians would later call its golden period. The crisis had revealed the true strength of Eldorian unity and the depth of popular support for their queen. Trade flourished, the arts prospered, and the kingdom's military reputation deterred any further thoughts of foreign intervention. But perhaps the most important outcome was personal. Queen Evangeline had proven to herself and her people that she was not merely a queen by marriage or circumstance, but a true sovereign who would fight and die for her crown and her people. The anniversary ceremony that had begun with celebration, descended into chaos, and ended in civil war, became known as the Day of Trials. It was remembered not for the treachery that began it, but for the unity and courage that ended it. And, in a quiet monastery in the mountains, Victoria spent her days in prayer and reflection, finding a peace that had eluded her during her years of bitter ambition. She had lost her bid for a crown, but perhaps she had found something more valuable: redemption and the knowledge that her kingdom had survived and thrived despite the chaos she had caused. Queen Evangeline ruled for another 15 years after the rebellion, and, when she finally passed the crown to her adopted heir, she did so with the complete confidence of a realm that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever.